The siren was still screaming outside when I pushed open the back door of the abandoned laundromat. The smell of rust and old soap rose like a punch. My flashlight cut across the dead machines and landed on something on the floor, right in the trail of blood that ended in a brown, dried pool. A torn evidence bag. Inside, a leather glove, soaked, the cuff marked with the stamp from our evidence locker, and, in my own handwriting, Case 47B, Hollow Creek, the same glove that had vanished from the crime scene 3 weeks ago, evaporated from the evidence room as if someone had decided to erase the truth. My stomach flipped. This wasn't coincidence. It was a message. The broken neon flickered, the radio hissed, and a red dot trembled in the center of my chest. "Drop it, Danny." The voice came from behind. Too familiar. Too old to be a stranger. Nobody had called me that in years, except for one man. I swallowed hard before turning. My ex-partner. The man who swore he'd never see me. Again, pointing a gun at me as if I were the evidence that needed to disappear. I was born and raised in the back roads of Tennessee, in a town where everyone knew my name and where the rules seemed simple. Right was right, wrong was wrong, and if you crossed that line, you paid the price. My father was the sheriff, the kind who wore a worn-out hat and boots always covered in dust, who believed the badge wasn't just a uniform but a cross you carried on your chest. I grew up listening to his stories about honor and duty, watching him leave before sunrise and return only when the moon had already circled the sky 3 times. I swore I'd never follow his path, never live under the shadow of a man who sacrificed everything in the name of the law. But the more I tried to run, the more I realized the blood in my veins was already branded with the calling to protect, even if it destroyed me inside. My entry into the force was fast, impulsive, like an inner voice pulling me toward an inevitable fate. I was good at what I did, quick to read a scene, sharp instincts, cold when everyone else lost control. I earned praise, medals, but also collected invisible scars. Every body I found, every mother crying, every suspect I pinned down with blood on my hands, each moment piled up inside me like a weight I could never set down. And still, I kept going, because stopping would mean admitting it wasn't worth it. But there was always something different about me compared to my colleagues. I never trusted the system blindly. Maybe because I had seen too many times how evidence disappeared, files got lost, or strange orders came from above that demanded silence instead of action. With time, I learned to keep my mouth shut and go along, but my conscience never let me sleep. My father always said corruption starts small, a free coffee here, a favor there. But before you know it, you're not choosing anymore. You're consumed. I saw it happen to men and women I admired who swore the same oath I did, but ended up selling their souls out of fear, convenience, or money. My partner, the same one now staring at me down the barrel of a gun, was my mirror at the beginning. Young, idealistic, full of words about honor. We were inseparable, like brothers. We shared cigarettes on night shifts, jokes in the middle of chaos, and even those heavy silences after scenes no human being should witness. But little by little, I noticed the cracks. Phone calls cut short when I walked into the room, reports missing details, and above all, a different look in his eyes whenever orders came down from higher up. Each day, I felt I was losing him, like he was being swallowed by the very swamp my father had warned me about. And me? I stayed firm, because I believed in something bigger, but also because I was terrified of what I'd find if I ever pulled back the curtain. The police force is called a family, they say, but families also hide secrets, protect the guilty, and sacrifice the innocent. And I was the outcast in my own house, the one who wouldn't take the free coffee, the one who refused to look away. It earned me respect from some, suspicion from most. In America, being a cop means carrying an invisible target. To criminals, you're the enemy. To society, you're both hope and threat. And inside the institution itself, you're disposable, just another pawn in someone else's game. I knew that. I accepted that. But I never imagined that one day, the enemy wouldn't be across the street. He'd be sitting right beside me, wearing the same badge, and that this betrayal would burn worse than any bullet. I became a cop because I believed I could clean up a piece of this world, bring justice in my father's memory. But over the years, I realized fighting crime was only half the battle. The other half was against silence, against cover-ups, against those who swore to be my brothers but instead manipulated evidence, erased trails, and stained the badge I still honored. That war consumed me every day. And maybe that's why, when I saw that bloodied glove on the floor, I knew instantly. The fight wasn't against strangers anymore. It was against my own house, against the rot growing from within. And that's the conflict I live in, torn between loyalty to the system that shaped me and the need to expose the truth, even if it costs me everything. Because deep down, I know the justice I seek may never be written in official reports, but in the eyes of those who still believe. A cop can be more than a corrupted piece in a dirty game. It was a stifling afternoon, the kind where the heat mixes with the tension of something about to happen. I was sitting at my desk, reviewing reports that didn't add up, documents that seemed written more to hide than to reveal. The broken air conditioner coughed warm air, and my coffee cup was nothing but a bitter residue at the bottom. That's when the radio crackled. That static that always precedes a turning point in someone's life. The voice was urgent, clipped, almost trembling. Available unit, immediate response needed at Hollow Creek. Active incident, possible link to a closed case. My heart jumped, because Hollow Creek wasn't just a name on a map. It was etched into the file that haunted me. Case 47B, the one that stole my sleep. The case of the missing glove. For a moment I froze, holding the radio as if I could crush the words coming through. Most cops would have heard it as just another call, another filthy corner to cover, another criminal to put down. But for me, it was an echo from the past, a personal summons. I had learned over the years that nothing in our work is coincidence. When a dead case comes back to life, it means someone wants you to see it. Or worse, someone wants to bury you with it. The dispatch confirmed the location, an abandoned industrial laundromat on the edge of town. The place was known for being used by local gangs as a stash house, but I also remembered it popping up in internal reports that mysteriously vanished from the database. The official warning was caution, possible gang activity, but the wording gnawed at me. The phrase, connection with a closed case, wasn't something a dispatcher would normally say. It came from someone who knew exactly which scar they were cutting open. I grabbed my vest and my weapon on autopilot, but inside I was burning. This wasn't duty pushing me forward. It was obsession. Ever since that glove had disappeared from the evidence locker, ever since I was suspended from the case under the excuse of a conflict of interest, I knew someone inside the department was playing judge and executioner. Now, with this call, it felt like they were pulling me back onto the board. As I walked down the corridor, my boots echoed like warning shots. Some colleagues glanced at me sideways, others pretended not to notice, a few muttered too low for me to hear. There were already rumors that I dug too deep, that I was dangerous because I wouldn't let go. And in a way, they were right. I was dangerous to anyone who thrived in silence. When I reached the car, I thought about calling command to confirm the order, but something in me locked up. If it were official, it would have come in a written memo, coded, cold. This wasn't official. It was personal. A lure thrown into the water, waiting to see if I would bite. And I did. I flipped on the siren even though there was no traffic in front of me. The sound wasn't for them. It was for me. A reminder that I still had a mission. That somewhere beneath the rot, there was truth. Every corner I turned, every red light I ignored, felt like walking down a narrowing corridor towards something inevitable. I remembered the first time I heard the name Hollow Creek, the body found in strange circumstances, the evidence that didn't match, the contradictory orders telling us to lower the priority. I remembered the day the glove disappeared as if swallowed by the dark. No trace, no explanation, only the emptiness that chased me for weeks. And now, after trying to bury the scar, the city was calling me back to the same wound. But this time it didn't feel like an investigation. It felt like a reckoning. The radio crackled again, but this time only static. Silence on the other end. Another confirmation that I was being led in alone into something bigger than I could control. On the road to the laundromat, the world seemed to close in. The sky, heavy and gray, sealed itself like a lid. Broken streetlights stretched their shadows across the asphalt like prison bars. Each mile dragged me deeper into the trap, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I needed to know who was pulling the strings, who had stolen the proof, who had turned my life into a string of unanswered questions. I didn't know if I would find gang members, fellow cops, or just ghosts from my past. All I knew was that the moment I answered that call, I stopped being just an officer on duty. I became the target, and there was no turning back. The laundromat rose on the horizon like a sleeping monster, massive, its walls stained by time, and its broken windows catching the last rays of sun like rusted blades. The empty parking lot was a wasteland of cracked concrete, overgrown weeds, crushed beer cans, and tire marks that ended abruptly, as if someone had slammed the brakes right at the edge between abandonment and danger. I cut the siren before pulling in, letting the engine growl alone in the silence of the street. The noise felt too loud, echoing against the dead walls of the city, announcing my arrival to whoever might be waiting inside. I parked the cruiser a few yards short. Pure instinct. The radio stayed silent, and that silence gnawed at me. Something was wrong in the simple fact that there were no other units around. No backup, no perimeter, nothing. Just me. As if the call had been scripted for one audience only. Me walking into the trap. I moved slowly, hand steady on my weapon, eyes sweeping every corner. The smell of rust mixed with sour soap drifted in the wind, clinging to my skin. The heavy iron doors were ajar, swaying slightly, groaning with a high-pitched whine that made my teeth clench. They shouldn't have been open. Someone had been here recently. The broken chains lay scattered on the ground, fresh marks of force. My pulse spiked, not from fear, but from the bitter rush of adrenaline that precedes every wrong step. I scanned the perimeter. Dead. Streetlights, a stray dog nosing through trash, the oppressive silence of a neighborhood that seemed to have emptied itself on purpose. Hollow Creek was never a welcoming place, but that night even the birds refused to sing. Every shifting shadow felt like eyes watching me, like fingers curled on triggers just beyond the reach of my light. My beam cut across the ground and caught fresh tracks. Footprints pressed into the dust, some too small to be grown men's, others heavier, dragging as if someone had been pulled against their will. The trail led straight to the half-open door. Each step I took echoed louder than the last, swallowed by the cavernous quiet. A loose sheet of tin clattered above me, snapped by the wind, its metallic crack like a gunshot in the distance. My chest seized, breath shallow, until I forced myself back under control. I brushed my hand along the crumbling wall by the entrance and felt the dampness seep into my palm, cold and slick, like the place itself was, still alive with secrets. Then I saw it, spray paint, black and fresh, still gleaming under my flashlight. A gang mark, the Black Vultures, known for staking claims in abandoned buildings. But what unsettled me wasn't the tag itself. It was how clean, how deliberate it looked, as if left there not to warn, but to signal. Then came the sound. A dull clatter from inside, something metallic hitting the ground and rolling into silence. My body froze, instinct screaming, before I slid into position, weapon raised. I edged closer, every muscle taut. My heartbeat thundered against my vest, my palms slick, but my finger didn't shake on the trigger. This was the edge, the razor line where life and death blurred. I caught my reflection in the shattered glass of the door, my own face warped, fractured, like a broken version of myself staring back. It struck me in that moment. This wasn't just a crime scene. It was a message. Every detail screamed it, and the blood-soaked glove waiting inside wasn't the beginning of the story. It was the warning. I took one last breath before stepping through the threshold, knowing the moment I crossed it, I wouldn't just be investigating a case. I'd be reopening the wound the department had tried so hard to stitch shut. And in my gut, I knew. I wasn't just walking into a crime scene. I was walking into a graveyard of ghosts that had been waiting for me all along. The door screeched as I shoved it open with my shoulder, a jagged sound that seemed to echo through the entire warehouse. Darkness swallowed me whole, broken only by the narrow beam of my flashlight cutting through the air. The scene was frozen in time. Industrial washers rusted and lifeless, broken laundry carts, piles of clothes stiff with dust and dampness. The smell was overwhelming, a cocktail of mold, sour detergent, and the unmistakable tang of dried blood. I could almost taste the iron in my mouth. My first step inside felt like a verdict. The concrete floor was cracked and stained, and every shadow seemed to move just beyond my light. I kept my gun raised, breathing short and shallow, ears tuned to the silence that pressed down like a weight. But there was something else. A low hum, constant, almost imperceptible, like a machine still running somewhere deeper inside. It didn't make sense. The place had been shut down for years. I followed the trail I had seen outside. The footprints were there, clearer now, mixed with long scuff marks, as if someone had been dragged down the main corridor. The path ended at a half-open door, and from behind it came that faint hum. I pressed my back against the damp wall and listened. Voices, low, muffled, but steady. Two men, arguing, not the nervous chatter of street thugs. No, these voices were calm, clipped, professional, too professional. I edged closer until fragments of words carried through. Evidence, missing, can't leave here. My blood froze. They were talking about the very thing that had brought me here. The glove, the closed case. This wasn't a coincidence. Someone had staged all of this. Then it happened. I stepped on a rotten plank, the wood snapping under my boot. The sound cracked like a gunshot. Silence. The voices stopped cold. The hum still droned in the background, but footsteps pounded suddenly, scattering. They knew they weren't alone anymore. I clenched my jaw, adrenaline burning through my veins. Retreat wasn't an option. I kicked the door open with my boot, weapon drawn. The room exploded into light and movement. Two men stood over a metal table stacked with boxes of evidence. My flashlight swept across their backs, then over the plastic sheen of evidence bags, and there it was, right in the center of the table. A leather glove, soaked in dried blood, stamped with the same case number I had written weeks before. The glove that had vanished from Hollow Creek. Proof that my paranoia hadn't been paranoia at all. "Police!" I shouted, gun steady. But instead of surrendering, they turned slowly, deliberate, like they'd rehearsed it. And that's when the floor fell out from under me. I knew their faces. One was an evidence tech I'd worked with countless times. The other, a veteran investigator, respected, untouchable. The betrayal slammed into me like a punch to the ribs. They didn't hesitate. One flipped the table, scattering boxes across the floor, while the other drew his weapon and fired. The flash lit up the room, bullets whining off metal. I dove behind a rusted washing machine, feeling the impact of rounds slamming into steel inches from me. The stench of gunpowder mixed with the copper tang of blood hanging in the air, dragging me back to every firefight I'd survived. Only this was different. I wasn't trading fire with criminals. These were men sworn to the same oath I was. For a brief moment, the shooting stopped. Silence, then the shuffle of boots pulling back. They weren't trying to kill me outright. Not yet. They wanted to wear me down, maybe even take me alive. I risked a glance over the machine, and that's when I saw it. A fallen evidence bag near my feet, a photograph inside, the Hollow Creek victim, and scrawled on the back, in handwriting I knew as well as my own, my ex-partner's. The air vanished from my lungs. The conspiracy wasn't just real, it was personal. My best friend, the man I trusted with my life, was tied to all of it. And then came the sound that sealed it. A metallic click right behind my head. The unmistakable cock of a pistol. Cold. Final. Should have stayed out of this, Danny. The voice was a whisper I hadn't heard in years, but it cut deeper than any bullet. My blood ran cold. My ex-partner was standing there, gun pressed to my skull. The click of the gun behind my head rang like a verdict, but what truly shattered me was the voice. I didn't need to turn to recognize it. That rough tone, the way he still dragged out my nickname like we were sharing smokes on the station steps. It was him, my ex-partner, the man who once swore to have my back until the end, now standing behind me as the executioner. "You shouldn't have come back here, Danny," he repeated, and every word cracked like a chain tightening around my neck. I raised my hands slowly, gun pointing up toward the ceiling, heart pounding with rage and disbelief. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the two men who had been firing at me relax their stances. They weren't the real threat. They were pawns, moving only because he had placed them. The real betrayal was inches from me, close enough that I could feel his breath on my neck. "So it's you?" I whispered, afraid that saying it aloud would make it final. He chuckled softly, that same cynical laugh I used to hear in the dead of night, but now it dripped poison. "It's always been me, Danny, and you've always been stupid enough to think you could save this rotten system. The glove didn't just vanish. Nothing ever vanishes by accident." A cold weight settled in my chest. Hollow Creek, the missing evidence, my suspension. None of it had been bad luck or oversight. He wasn't just involved, he was the architect. And worse, he had weaponized the very badge I still honored, twisting it into a shield for corruption. "Why?" My voice cracked, more plea than question. "Because I got tired of being a pawn," he answered, forcing me to turn toward him. And when I met his eyes, I barely recognized the man I once trusted. The loyal partner was gone. What stared back was someone hardened, hollowed out. "You think the gangs run this city? No. The real power decides what gets filed and what gets buried. I just chose the right side of the table." Behind him, the table of evidence screamed louder than his words. Plastic bags marked with official seals, files signed and stamped, photographs that should have been locked away. And in the middle of it all, the blood-soaked glove gleamed under the flickering light like a trophy. Proof that the system wasn't failing. It was. Feeding off its own corruption. That's when I understood. The Hollow Creek victim hadn't been some random casualty. The case was tied to something much bigger. Politicians, businessmen, names I'd only ever seen on TV smiling for cameras. My ex-partner wasn't just complicit. He was the bridge between the dirt and the law. My stomach churned as he stepped closer, gun steady, eyes locked on mine. "I gave you every chance to walk away, Danny, but you never could keep your mouth shut. Now the only way to save you is to erase you." The words gutted me, because in that instant I realized I wasn't just a loose end. I was the scapegoat. One of the other men dropped a folder on the floor and papers scattered. Among them was a photo of me, taken the same day the glove disappeared. They had tracked me, shadowed me, built a case that would paint me as the dirty cop if things went south. I wasn't only unwanted, I was expendable. Then he pulled out the final piece. From inside his vest, he revealed an old cassette tape, labeled with the Hollow Creek case number. "The victim wasn't who you thought, Danny. Hollow Creek was a message, and I was the messenger." On that tape, he said, was the recorded confession of a powerful public figure, a politician, a family man, a face plastered across billboards, admitting to human trafficking ties. The tape had been hidden, buried, erased from the chain of evidence. And the glove? It was a breadcrumb, left to confuse, to distract, to keep the truth strangled. The revelation hit me like a hammer. This wasn't just corruption. It was a conspiracy sprawling far beyond the walls of the department. My best friend wasn't lost. He had been swallowed whole by it. For a moment, I felt detached from my own body, watching everything from outside myself. I wasn't staring at a criminal. I was staring at the man I once called brother, now turned into the enemy. And that discovery cut deeper than any bullet ever could. When the barrel of his gun pressed cold against the side of my head, I realized the heaviest weight I carried wasn't the threat of dying. It was the collapse of everything I'd ever believed in. I had always wondered how I'd react if the rot showed itself inside my own house. I thought I'd be ready. Thought my principles and my father's lessons would be strong enough to hold me upright. but facing my ex-partner, the man who once dragged me out of firefights, who shared silence with me after scenes too brutal for words, tore me apart in ways I wasn't prepared for. It wasn't just betrayal, it was personal, intimate, like having my heart ripped out and crushed in front of me. Anger burned through me like fire, but with it came the shadow of doubt. What if he was right? What if the system was so poisoned that fighting inside it was nothing but wasted breath? How many times had I already watched evidence vanish, victims ignored, reports rewritten to protect someone powerful? I had convinced myself that beneath all the cracks, there was still something worth saving. But with every bitter word he spat, I wondered if I wasn't just another fool clinging to a lie. I thought of my father, the man who never surrendered, who died believing the law was bigger than any shadow. But I also remembered how quickly the department erased his memory, how inconvenient his integrity became once he was gone. Was I repeating his fate? Was I nothing more than another disposable piece in a game where integrity was punished, not honored? Inside me, a war raged. One side demanded loyalty to the badge, to the oath I swore, to the belief that truth still mattered. The other side whispered that maybe he was right, that survival meant silence, that fighting would only end with me in a shallow grave. Every second, his voice dug deeper into me, trying to uproot what little hope I had left. "You don't get it, Danny," he said. "This isn't about right or wrong. It's about survival. You keep killing yourself trying to clean the filth, but it always comes back." I just decided not to drown with it. And I understood him in part. I understood the exhaustion, the endless weight of battles fought in the dark against enemies you couldn't name. I understood the temptation to lay down arms, to stop bleeding for a system that spits you out. A part of me wanted to believe him, to lower my weapon, to let the war end even if it meant surrendering my soul. But another part of me, the part carved by every victim's eyes, every desperate plea, every silent scream left behind, refused. That part reminded me why I wore the badge in the first place. It reminded me of the children who smiled when we kept them safe, of the families who only had us left to believe in. That part screamed that if I surrendered now, if I joined him in the shadows, then all of it, every drop of blood, every sleepless night, would have been for nothing. The dilemma ripped me apart. Pulling the trigger on him felt like murdering a brother, but lowering my gun meant letting corruption win, meant adding my name to the long list of cowards who closed their eyes. My hands shook, not from fear, but from the weight of the choice. He kept talking, each word a nail driven deeper. "You always wanted to be the hero, Danny, but heroes don't survive here. They're headlines for a day, then forgotten." For a heartbeat, I almost believed him. Almost. But then I saw it again. The victim from Hollow Creek, lying lifeless in my memory. Their silence, their injustice. This wasn't about me, wasn't about him. It was about them. And if I gave up now, their blood would be on my hands too. I swallowed hard. Sweat dripped into my eyes, the taste of gunpowder still thick in the air. I looked into his eyes and saw not just a traitor, but a reflection of what I could become if I let go. That terrified me more than the gun at my head. The real battle wasn't against him, it was against myself. Against the exhaustion, the doubt, the temptation to let go. Against the dark voice whispering that none of this mattered. And in that moment, I knew I couldn't become what he had. Not now, not ever. The silence between us weighed heavier than the gun at my temple. His weapon was steady, his breathing calm, too calm, like he had rehearsed this moment for years. Mine was erratic, chest pounding with a mix of fury and clarity that only comes when you're standing at the razor's edge between life and death. I knew this was it. No more hesitation. I had to choose. Every memory surged at once. Families who had trusted me, victims left voiceless. My father's voice echoing that character is what you do when no one is watching. But someone was watching. The man who once saved my life in an alley now stood ready to end it in this forgotten laundromat. Pulling the trigger on him would mean destroying a part of myself, but lowering my gun would mean surrendering to the very corruption I swore to fight. He saw my hesitation and smirked, the smile of a man, who thought the battle was already won. "Drop it, Danny. It doesn't have to end like this. You don't need to be a martyr. Step in with me, and I'll make sure you live. All it takes is shutting your eyes, letting the ones above decide what's right and wrong." His words were sharp, seductive in their simplicity. A way out, an end to the endless war I'd been fighting. Part of me wanted to believe it, to let go, to stop bleeding for a world that only seemed to sink deeper in its own rot. But then I heard it, a faint sound from the back of the room, a muffled groan. I swung my flashlight toward it and froze. Someone was tied to a chair in the corner, duct tape across their mouth, eyes wide with terror. A living witness, a victim caught in the web they were trying to bury. That single sight shattered my doubt. This wasn't about me or him anymore. It was about them, about every soul crushed by this machine of silence and power. My decision crystallized in an instant. I couldn't bend, couldn't surrender. Not while lives still depended on someone refusing to bow. I tightened my grip on the gun, forced a breath into my lungs, and steadied my voice. If I go down tonight, it won't be as a traitor. The smirk vanished from his face. For the first time, I saw real anger flash in his eyes. He pulled the trigger. So did I. The laundromat roared with the thunder of gunfire, the muzzle flashes tearing the dark apart. His bullet seared past my temple, exploding against the wall behind me. Mine. Struck true, ripping into his shoulder and throwing him against the metal table. Evidence bags scattered. Photographs fluttered to the ground, his blood mingling with the files he had once used to bury the truth. I moved fast, rushing to the corner where the witness trembled. My knife tore through the ropes, ripping the tape from her mouth. She gasped, words spilling out through sobs. "They'll kill me. They'll kill me if I talk." Her terror was proof enough of the conspiracy's reach. Behind me, my ex-partner groaned, dragging himself toward his fallen weapon, blood dripping in a trail. I could have ended it right there, one clean shot to close the chapter. But something inside me resisted. Killing him would silence him. I wanted him alive, forced to face the truth in the light he had spent years smothering. The decision wasn't just to fight back. It was about who I chose to be in that moment. Not a coward, not a traitor, not another name swallowed by silence. I chose to resist, even if it meant being hunted, even if it meant dying with nothing but my conscience intact. I raised my radio, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "Unit at Hollow Creek. Internal involvement confirmed. Immediate backup requested." The line hissed with static. No answer. I didn't care. I had made my stand. I didn't know if I'd survive the night, but for the first time in years, I knew exactly who I was, and that was enough. The echoes of gunfire were still clinging to the walls when I heard boots. Pounding outside, voices overlapping, radios spitting static. Backup, late, as always. They poured into the laundromat like a wave, lights flaring, orders barked sharp and clipped. And then the scene hit them. A bleeding officer on the floor, my ex-partner sprawled and cuffed, evidence scattered across a filthy metal table, a witness trembling and half-collapsed in the corner. The air stank of gunpowder, sweat, and betrayal. The first reaction was shock. You could read it on their faces. Wide, eyes, jaws set, a current of disbelief. Some muttered under their breath, others froze, caught between instinct and the weight of what they were walking into. One or two stared at me like they were seeing a ghost, because in their world, corruption was rumor. Here, it was bleeding out right in front of them. Command arrived minutes later, calm and calculated. They snapped into procedure: secure the scene, seal the evidence, escort the witness, transport the wounded. Every order was sterile, deliberate, like they were already writing the report in their heads. I watched as they packed away the blood-soaked glove, sealed the folders, collected the tape recorder. All the same motions I had seen 100 times before, but now I understood. These seals, these bags, these chains of custody were the same system that had lost the glove weeks ago. The same system that had suspended me. Watching them handle it made bile rise in my throat. The witness was pulled out under heavy guard. She wouldn't meet anyone's eyes but mine. Her look was desperate, pleading, as though she knew that even surrounded by uniforms, she still wasn't safe. She had whispered fragments of the truth already, names of men too powerful to touch, meetings in quiet rooms, orders that came from the top. She was a live target now, and I realized I had put her in even more danger simply by pulling her out alive. By the next morning, the headlines were already boiling. Officer wounded in Hollow Creek standoff. Investigation into internal misconduct underway. Clean, vague, bloodless words. They didn't capture the chaos, the betrayal, the way the city's rot had been dragged into the open. Inside the department, the ripple was louder. Whispers in the hall. Conversations cut short when I walked by. Some colleagues avoided me entirely. Others looked at me with a flicker of respect they didn't dare voice. And a few, too polished, too smooth, watched me with quiet calculation, as though measuring when and how to strike. Then the real consequences began. I was officially removed from field duty, placed under the guise of protective reassignment. My car searched, my locker emptied, my files combed through. I knew the drill. It was the system's way of putting me in a cage, of controlling the narrative. Errors began to surface in my paperwork, oversights I knew I hadn't made, seeds being planted, stories prepared in case they needed to discredit me. And yet, there were sparks of loyalty. A fellow officer slipped me a folded note in passing. Don't trust the briefings. Don't trust the light. Listen in the dark. Another brought me scraps of intel, things whispered in parking lots, hints of others who wanted the truth out but feared being the next name buried. Outside, pressure mounted. Politicians issued statements about isolated incidents. Businessmen smiled in interviews about maintaining stability. At the same time, I began getting anonymous calls, letters tucked under my windshield, offers to keep things quiet. Every message was the same: stay silent or be erased. And me? I was caught in the middle, neither celebrated as a hero nor condemned as a traitor. Just a problem, a liability walking the halls in plain sight. Every door I opened, every shadow I crossed, I wondered if it would be my last. But beneath the fear, there was a fire. Because now it wasn't rumor, it wasn't paranoia. I had the glove, the tape, the testimony, and for the first time, the system had slipped. The immediate consequences were brutal: isolation, suspicion, and a target painted on my back. But I had one thing they couldn't take from me: truth. And that truth, fragile as it was, meant I couldn't turn back. They brought me into the interrogation room as if I were the suspect, not the cop who had dragged the rot into the light. The irony wasn't lost on me. Gray walls, a single bulb buzzing overhead, the faint smell of stale smoke and disinfectant. I sat in the cold metal chair and waited. I knew this wasn't routine. This was theater, a test to see if I would break, or at least measure how far I was willing to go. The door creaked open, and to my surprise, it wasn't a commanding officer or a prosecutor who walked in. It was the witness I had cut loose in Hollow Creek. She was still under guard, eyes wide with the kind of fear that doesn't fade overnight. But she'd insisted on speaking with me. The escort lingered in the doorway before leaving us alone, shutting the door with a heavy click. For a moment, it was just us, two survivors of the same nightmare staring at each other. "They're going to kill me," she blurted, voice trembling but steady enough to pierce the room. "Not just the men you saw in that laundromat, the ones above them, the ones you can't even see." Her words chilled me, but also sharpened me. I leaned in, voice low. "Then give me something they can't erase." She inhaled, as if stepping off a cliff, and the flood began. Names, politicians, smiling on billboards, businessmen with contracts worth millions, people who were supposed to be untouchable. The laundromat was just one cog in a machine. Evidence stashes, money laundering networks, layers of cover-ups. And then the final knife twist. Your partner wasn't just some dirty cop. He was chosen. Chosen because of you. Because you trusted him. They needed someone close to you to be the bridge. My chest tightened. Every missing piece snapped into place. The vanished glove, the suspension. the doctored reports. I hadn't been unlucky. I'd been targeted. The door opened again, and my pulse spiked. This time, it wasn't another witness or guard. It was the chief of operations, a man everyone respected, a figure who carried authority like armor. He closed the door quietly, dismissed the escort with a nod, and sat across from me. His gaze was heavy, calculating. "You've heard enough already, Danny," he said slowly. "Now you need to decide what you're going to do with it." The witness froze, her fear spiking, but he didn't move to silence her. Instead, he locked eyes with me. There was no malice there, only exhaustion. "I know what happened in Hollow Creek. I know your partner wasn't alone, but you need to understand something. You can't fight this head on. If you try to blow the lid off everything at once, they'll bury you before you finish your first sentence. The only way forward is precise cuts, and I can help you, if you trust me." Suspicion gnawed at me. Why now? Why step out of the shadows after so much silence? "Why?" I asked. His jaw tightened. "Because you've gone too far to be erased quietly, and because if I keep playing dumb, I drown with them. I've buried too many already." It was in that moment that everything shifted. For the first time, I saw a crack inside the institution itself. Not just rot, but a fracture where light might slip through. He wasn't offering me salvation. He was offering me a choice. Go rogue and get crushed, or walk a razor-thin line with him, striking where it mattered most. The witness looked at me like I was her last chance. The chief studied me like I was a gamble he wasn't sure he should take. And I walked out of that room with no clear answers, only one certainty. The war wasn't just mine anymore. That conversation changed everything, because it showed me the enemy wasn't just my ex-partner or the men with guns in dark rooms. It was an empire, sprawling and unseen. And now, for the first time, I had an ally on the inside, if I was willing to trust him. I walked out of that room knowing I wasn't the same man who had walked in. Before, I wore the badge like a shield, convincing myself that despite the cracks, it could still protect the innocent, and maybe protect me from the rot I saw creeping in. But after facing betrayal, after hearing the witness's truth and watching the chief of operations quietly admit the system was a labyrinth of corruption, I finally understood. The badge was never a shield. It was a mask, and masks can hide both justice and decay. Back in my apartment that night, the city pulsed outside my window. Sirens wailing in the distance, trucks growling down cracked asphalt, the occasional scream swallowed by the dark. Each sound reminded me that the war wasn't only fought in alleys and abandoned warehouses. It raged in boardrooms, offices, and government halls where shadows wore suits and smiles. I sat on the edge of my bed, peeled off my vest, and stared at my hands. They were trembling, not from fear, but from the weight of awareness. Every choice from here on would define me more than any commendation or medal ever could. The reflection was brutal. What was I really chasing? Justice or vengeance? The line between them blurred in the haze of my anger. The memory of my ex-partner pressing a gun to my skull burned like iron, and part of me wanted nothing more than to return the favor. But if I gave in to that rage, I would become the very thing I swore, to fight. My father's voice haunted me, reminding me that true strength was in holding the line, not surrendering to the darkness. For the first time, I realized survival wasn't enough. If I wanted to tear at this web, I'd need patience, something I'd never valued. I was a man who rushed toward danger, who reacted on instinct. But now I saw that rushing in would get me killed before I could even scratch the surface. The chief's words echoed, "You can't fight this head on. You need precision." He was right. To win, I'd have to be colder, sharper, more strategic. When I looked in the bathroom mirror later, I hardly recognized myself. My stubble had grown heavy. My eyes were sunken, dark with exhaustion. But beneath the weariness, there was a fire I hadn't seen before, a defiance that wouldn't let me quit. I wasn't just a tired cop anymore. I was a man who had looked into the abyss and chosen to keep walking, not away from it, but straight through. The hardest truth I had to swallow was this: I couldn't save everyone. That realization cut deep. For years, I carried the weight of every victim I couldn't reach, every mistake, every life lost. But Hollow Creek had taught me that burden would bury me alive if I didn't let it go. To fight smart, I'd need to pick my battles and strike at the heart of the machine. And I had to accept that some would slip through the cracks. That was the cost of survival. Still, something fundamental had shifted. I was no longer just the son of a sheriff chasing his father's ideal of honor. I was a man marked by betrayal, by conspiracy, by survival. The badge still sat on my chest, but its meaning had changed. It wasn't a symbol of protection anymore. It was a reminder of the choice I made every day, to resist, to refuse silence, even when it meant carrying a target on my back. This reflection transformed me into something I hadn't expected, not just a cop hunting justice, but a survivor in a war against an enemy that lived in the dark. And as heavy as that burden was, I knew one thing: there was no going back. The path ahead would be lonelier, deadlier, but it was the only one where I could still look myself in the mirror and know I hadn't sold my soul. The official conclusion of the Hollow Creek operation was written in cold, sterile lines, stripped of the chaos I had lived through. Incident resulted in armed confrontation. 1 officer injured, evidence recovered, witness secured. A neat summary designed to turn hell into paperwork. But I was there. I smelled the blood in the air, heard the echo of gunshots bouncing off rusted walls, saw the eyes of betrayal staring back at me. No report could capture the truth of what happened inside that laundromat. Forensics arrived late, as always, when the adrenaline was gone and only exhaustion remained. They cataloged evidence bags like they were props, photographed bullet holes, measured bloodstains. The glove, the very one that had vanished from Case 47B, was sealed. Again, this time with stamps and signatures that I no longer trusted. The witness was escorted out under heavy guard, though her trembling gaze told me she knew protection didn't guarantee survival. And my ex-partner, the man who once called me brother, was wheeled out on a gurney, cuffed, blood seeping through the bandage on his shoulder, his eyes still carrying that glint of defiance, as if even in defeat he believed he had won. The radio crackled back to life, routine chatter resuming as if nothing extraordinary had taken place. Units checked in, status reports rolled out, and the machine kept turning. But under that surface hum, I could feel it. The blast wave had already hit the department. The whispers in the hallways grew louder, names muttered in suspicion. Conversations cut short the moment I entered a room. Some officers looked at me with a flicker of respect, others with outright fear, and a few with cold calculation, as though already planning my downfall. For me, the operation didn't end with the evidence sealed. It ended when I sat back in my car, the siren dark, and let the silence press down on me. Closing my eyes, I saw it all again. The glove on the table, my ex-partner's voice offering survival at the cost of my soul, the shots fired that could have ended me. My body was out of Hollow Creek, but my mind was still trapped inside those walls. Emotionally, the closure was hollow. I had done what was right, saved a life, recovered proof, exposed betrayal. But I had also ignited a war I couldn't stop. My name was now etched onto lists in dark rooms, where men decided who lived, who vanished, and who became a scapegoat. I was no longer just an officer. I was a liability, a witness, a threat. Back at headquarters, the rituals of containment played out. Reports filed, chain of custody reinforced, press statements drafted. The chief of operations pulled me aside, voice low and steady. "You survived the first strike, Danny, but don't fool yourself. They won't stop here." He slipped me an unmarked envelope before walking away. Inside was a single line, handwritten. "Trust the shadows, not the spotlight." It was both a warning and a reminder that the real war was fought in silence. On paper, Hollow Creek was done. Evidence secured, suspect in custody, witness alive. But I knew better. It was only the first act. A curtain pulled back on a stage where the players wore uniforms, suits, and masks. And I was now part of that play, whether I wanted it or not. Driving home that night, I kept the lights off inside my apartment. letting the dark settle around me. The city outside carried on, indifferent to the battles waged in its alleys and offices. I stripped off the badge and laid it on the table. For the first time, I didn't see it as protection. I saw it as a reminder, a marker that I had crossed a line I could never step back from. Hollow Creek's conclusion wasn't a period. It was a comma, and the sentence that followed was still being written in blood, gunpowder, and the choices I would be forced to make. There are things the Academy never teaches, things no manual dares to write. There's no chapter on what to do when the gun aimed at you is held by someone who once shared your patrol car. When the bullet that almost ends your life comes from the hand of a man you once trusted like family. That's the invisible scar Hollow Creek left on me. The certainty that enemies don't always hide in the shadows of the street. Sometimes, they wear the same badge, speak the same language, carry the same oath. In the days that followed, I drifted through the precinct like a ghost. Whispers died the second I entered a room. Eyes looked away, and the silence around me weighed more than any bulletproof vest ever could. And yet, in that isolation, I found something greater than myself. I understood that being a cop isn't about collecting medals or being remembered as a hero. It's about showing up again and again, even when everything around you tells you to quit. Hollow Creek didn't just teach me about corruption, it taught me about humanity. Because in the end, the real fight wasn't against my ex-partner or the businessmen and politicians hiding behind doctored files. The fight was inside me. It was the daily battle not to become part of the swamp I swore to drain. It was waking up each morning, looking in the mirror, and still recognizing the man staring back, despite the exhaustion, the suspicion, and the scars. I learned that truth never arrives whole, never arrives easy. It's a thin wire you tug in the dark, and most of the time it cuts your hands as you hold on. But someone has to pull, because if no one does, silence wins. And silence is the deadliest accomplice of all. There were nights I thought about walking away, disappearing, becoming just another anonymous face in the crowd. But then I remembered the witness, her eyes begging me to keep fighting. I remembered the Hollow Creek victim, whose blood still cried out for justice. I remembered my father, who believed to his dying breath that a man's character is the last thing he can't afford to lose. Those memories kept me standing when nothing else did. Now I know I won't change the system alone. Maybe I'll never even see real justice carried out, but I've learned that every choice matters. Every time I refuse to look away, every time I say no to silence, a crack forms in the wall. Small, almost invisible, but enough to let light through. And sometimes that's all the world needs, a spark to show the way. My ex-partner chose to survive by selling himself. I chose to survive by resisting. He became a symbol of the rot within. I decided to be a reminder that resistance still exists, even when it hurts. If my story stands for anything, let it prove this. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's deciding to act in spite of it. So what's the final lesson of Hollow Creek? Simple and brutal. Never put blind faith in institutions. Trust principles. Never put blind faith in men. Trust what you choose to be when no one's watching. And above all, never let despair turn you into the same monster you set out to fight. Because in the end, badges tarnish, uniforms wear out, reports get buried. But conscience, that's what remains. And when you lay your head down at night, it's not the world's judgment that matters, but the quiet answer you give yourself. Did I do what was right? That's the only question I carry with me since Hollow Creek. And as long as I can still answer yes, then I know it's worth continuing. If this story held you, if it made you think, if you saw pieces of yourself in this struggle for truth, hit subscribe and share in the comments which part struck you the hardest. Your voice matters here, and together, we keep the flame alive.